So hello and welcome back to my channel. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Saskia and I'm starting a PhD in September. So I thought I would share with you, I guess, my qualifications of how I kind of got into it, and then also the actual process of applying, because I've now applied for 3 years straight. The first year doesn't really count. I was just applying for shits and gigs because no one told me how anything worked and I was a naive undergraduate. In my masters, I spent a lot of time applying for projects that I proposed, and then in my year of unemployment, shall we say, I spent more time applying for projects that other people proposed. So if we start with, I guess, my education, kind of how I got there, we'll start with uni. I did a Bachelor's of Psychology straight. I didn't do any, I didn't do a minor, I didn't do any of that. I did take some optional modules that weren't, I don't know, like the psychology module. I think I took 2 optional modules that were criminology. But again, I don't think that was particularly relevant. The only relevant thing I did in my undergraduate was work as a research assistant. I worked on 5 or 6 research assistant schemes where you basically just volunteered and said, hi, I'd like to do some research assistant work, and they kind of allocated you to someone. I did some in developmental, I did some in clinical, I did some in cognitive psychology. Again, it wasn't particularly relevant what I had done them in, it was more so just relevant that I had done them. Like, I couldn't necessarily tell you what my projects were covering, but I could tell you the skills I learned, and that is what I used for things like interviews and applications when they would say, what research skills do you have? Because, yeah, theoretically in an undergraduate you learn all of these things. I never submitted an ethics application though. Like, I never conduct my research with all secondary data. I didn't collect any data myself. So I needed that to have anything to talk about. Again, if you've watched my I think it's like psychology advice or something, highly recommend doing a research project that is relevant to something you might be interested in, or even just that allows you to collect data, because I hadn't submitted ethical approval, didn't create surveys, didn't do anything, never conducted a project. And I will say that hindered me just generally, because they'd ask you about, like, you know, you get to interviews and they're like, what did you do for your research project? Like, what research experience do you have? And I'd go, well, I've done a systematic review. And they're like, wow, that's really intelligent. And they're like, so how do you ethical approval? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Like, I've never done this. So I think while all my research assistant schemes were phenomenal, again, doesn't matter what they're in, just kind of needed to get some research experience. Having a research project where I did something would have been great, because obviously when you're applying for a PhD, it is about research. You need to have research experience, you need to be able to talk about research. I haven't conducted any research, and a PhD is, you know, there are some PhDs where it is kind of secondary data. You're looking at like longitudinal studies that already exist. None of the ones I was looking at were like that. So I had to just figure things out and kind of go, yeah, well, I've done this, and well, I've done this. And then they kind of go like, oh, why do you want to do a PhD? And I go, well, I've never done my own research project, so la 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 la. I then did a master's in psychological research, which was psychological research methods, psychology research methods. It was essentially the most generic master's that exists. I wanted a conversion course for psychology for someone who'd already done an undergraduate. Like, I didn't want to do a degree in developmental, I didn't want to do a degree in social, because my interests are not in the bit of that gets studied. Like, there was a developmental disorders master's, which, yeah, could have been interesting. I quite like autism and ADHD, but they only care about children. Like, we didn't learn about adults. Autism doesn't pass age 18 according to just anything I ever learnt. So yeah, I did the most generic masters possible, and then I took, again, my optional modules were unrelated to anything ever. I took criminology, criminological psychology. I took cognitive neuropsychiatry, MATLAB. MATLAB was great. I used MATLAB as, I haven't opened MATLAB and I hated every minute of that module, but I mentioned that in every single interview. Picking up a new, like, coding or research skill, so important. And I can flex my good grade on it, which was mentioned in one of my interviews. They were like, oh, so we don't use, I think they said, oh, so we use R. And I was like, oh, I'm not familiar with that. And I was like, oh, transferable skills, go. I was like, well, yes, well, I've done MATLAB and I did really well. And like, we did see that you did really well. And I was like, yeah, I did do really well. So picking up something like that, even if it's not through your master's, probably very helpful, because again, it was one of the only things I could mention. Because again, when it came to my master's research project, after a lot of fighting everybody, I got a project that I wanted. It was still secondary data. I have got to the end of 2 degrees and never done a real research project. Real. Never collected primary data. Long term. Yeah, I've done a couple of like, oh, maybe a tiny study like this. I've not done a research project like a big one that I've designed. And I do think that hinders me, which is why you need other things to talk about. Like, I don't have that, and therefore I mention my MATLAB. Therefore I mention the research assistant schemes that I did. Therefore I mention any small thing I can. Like, I did a research internship module. You were a research assistant for 6 months, you ran a study. But again, I joined that project after they'd created it, after they'd set it up. So I still didn't have any of this experience. And yeah, I got research experience again, which was useful to talk about, because they'd ask, oh, well, what project have you been involved in recently? And I'd go, well, I don't want to talk about my systematic review because I don't think that shows much. I don't think that shows many research skills from me. So I was like, oh, well, I did a research internship and here's what I did. And even if it's not relevant to the project, like my research internship was in cognitive neuroscience. I was not looking at masters in cognitive neuroscience. I was not interested in this. I was not looking at PhDs in that topic. But I brought that up every time because I was like, oh, well, I use MATLAB to analyse data. I use SPSS to analyse data. I ran through protocol. I conducted participant recruitment sessions. I analysed participant data. I kept participant data secure. Like, that was the only time I kind of picked up all those research skills that most people got a year ago. So if you've only done like secondary data analysis, pick up primary data analysis. So finished my degrees. I had a first at undergrad and a distinction at masters. Again, I don't know how relevant that was. Then I just started to apply for PhDs. Essentially, any PhD that came up on Find a PhD, my best friend, I applied for. If it mentioned autism in the title, I was applying. And I was relatively successful in my applications, not in the interviews, but I did get an interview a lot. And I do think that's just because my degrees are good. Like, I don't personally think that I stand out as an applicant. I haven't worked as a healthcare assistant. I haven't worked as an assistant psychologist. I have only ever done like textbook psychology. I've done research psychology, which is obviously somewhat relevant, but a lot of these PhDs will have placements as a clinical psychologist, like placements doing psychology face-to-face talking that I've not done. And that has been mentioned as my feedback once or twice, that you do not have practical experience, which I'm fine receiving that feedback because that's not what I want to do with my psychology degrees, if that makes sense. So in terms of applying for PhDs, scoured Find a PhD every single day, sent off generic applications, generic supporting statements, where I basically just mentioned any piece of research I'd ever done. And hear me out, I think the thing that did help me get interviews is obviously, yeah, like foundational knowledge was good and I had good degrees and all of that. I think a lot of the reason that I got interviews and had something to talk about in interviews was because I'm autistic. Unfortunately, you can't just pick up this skill. You know, you can't just go, I'm going to apply for a job in, I'm going to apply for PhD looking at like face processing, and you can't just develop really bad face processing and go, oh, well, here's why this is relevant to me. I think it helps that my interest is in something I have, because all of these interviews on autism, eating disorders, mental health problems, I was like, well, hey besties, here's why I want to do this. Because I've always really struggled with the why did this project interest you? Things interest me if I've been through them. I think, yes, I find some things interesting, like, oh, social psychology is interesting. Some bits of cognitive, I'm like, well, this is interesting. But something is only PhD level interesting to me if I have some kind of experience and I can go, well, here, by the way, I'm autistic, here's my experience with this, and, I've had first-hand experience of how bad the system is, and I'd really like to reform that. And, like, obviously, if you've got clinical experience, you can go, oh, well, I've seen it from, like, through my patients. But I do think that having that experience of being autistic and being able to go, well, here's what I think, and I think it's really important to include experts by experience in research and people who have had these experiences in research. I do think that was a massive selling point of, I guess, getting my foot into the door for an interview. So obviously you can't just, like, become autistic, but if you have clinical experience and you can mention, oh, well, I saw this firsthand of how, this group of people was treated differently and I really want to reform that, that is still a very good way to get it done. Because obviously while that got my foot in the door, it didn't get me a PhD. The PhDs very often would go to someone who was 5 years older than me and had worked as an assistant psychologist for 5 years. Like, it got me in the door, but didn't get me any further than the door. So then, you write these supporting statements and I kind of highlight, oh, here's all the research that I've done, here's why I want to do a PhD. It would very much just be like, I love research, don't know what else to do, but love research. Then it would come to interviews, and I don't know what I've ever done wrong in an interview, again, because you don't get feedback. However, I think the things that I've done well in an interview is I know exactly what questions they're going to ask. It's after you've done the first interview, or you've had one interview about a PhD, you know what they're going to ask. They're going to ask you, why do you want to do a PhD? Why do you want to do this project? What do you think you can bring to this project? Do you have any areas of difficulty that you anticipate with this project? What skills do you have that set you up for this project? Like, it was very clear what questions they were going to ask, and therefore it was very easy to pick up on, they didn't like this answer last time, or, oh, someone's probably got a better answer that time. And I think over time, like, my skills didn't get any better in the sense that the PhDs I applied for 2 years ago, or my applications 2 years ago to compare to applications a month ago, the application looked the same. Like, I did get into these interviews for a lot of them with nothing new written on these applications. The interviews themselves, I think I just had a better answer. And unfortunately, it's very hard to get a better answer if no one gives you any feedback. But I think a lot of the time, and this is something that really irks me but does make sense, a lot of the time it is basically about, can you become besties with your interviewer? Like, I've been rejected from a lot of PhDs where I've then gone online and seen that the person that they've recruited is someone who's done a bachelor's at that university with that supervisor and did their dissertation with that supervisor, then a master's at that university with that supervisor, then they did a PGCE at that university with that supervisor, and I'm like, well, okay, like, even if you are the most excellent candidate ever, you do want to have some kind of good rapport with that person. And I think that is where I struggled. I think something that is potentially helpful is when you apply for a PhD, they always ask, like, oh, if you've got any informal inquiries, send them to this person. I recommend sending something. Now, I can't tell you what to send because I don't know. I've only ever sent, like, an informal inquiry once, and it was, what's meant to go in this research proposal? Is it not, like, I didn't try and sound stupid doing it. I was like, oh, well, is it a typical proposal? Like, should we include this method in this section? And then I just got back a look at the application form, and I was like, okay, well, this person hates me. So, like, I've literally had applications with my own dissertation supervisor. Like, I had an interview and I was like, I thought this was going really well, and then you get rejected without reason. I've had applications with people that I've had multiple applications with them, and they've continually given me interviews, so on paper they're like, yep, she's got this. And then I arrive and there's just nothing happening between us. I think I'm answering the questions really well, I think I'm doing really well, but I don't have a foot in the door at that university. I think working as a research assistant in a university is good. Applying, if you do your undergrad at University 1, doing your masters at University 1 as well, and then doing a PhD at University 1 is very helpful. Like, a lot of the people that I see that get PhDs are people who have been able to stay at one university, because regardless of how good my applications are, regardless of how good I am in an interview, an interviewer has only met me once. They've met me for 30 minutes and they've maybe gone, yeah, she could be okay, but I've been working with person X for 4 years and they are good. Like, that's something that's, again, really annoying because you can't do anything about it. Like, again, I think the PhD that I ended up getting, or the PhDs that I kind of got further into, maybe no one from that university applied. It's kind of like Nepo baby PhDs of, you've got to be besties with that lecturer to have a chance. So, yeah, again, that one's very difficult to like give advice of how to get into that, like how to build that rapport. I think if you will probably, if you're looking in a certain area, find the same researchers putting out projects, putting out applications multiple times, and you will apply multiple times. And that, I guess, does build rapport of when you have an interview, you can go, oh, I remember you, da 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 da. Like, because otherwise, you know, you're meeting a stranger for 30 minutes and you're perfect on paper, but they don't know you and they do know someone else. That was another thing that was good for me when I applied for my PhD, is the week before, I'd just done an interview with the exact same two people and I thought we'd got on quite well, and they did actually like give me feedback and like they did actually interact with me rather than just saying, you're not in, bye. Like, they gave me good feedback and I replied, I was like, oh, this is great, thank you very much. And I was like, oh, this feels good. This feels like we are building friendship. You know, this feels like we're building rather than it just being a, you know, rather than it just being like a response from the application system, being like, you've been rejected, full stop. Like, I then had another interview with the exact same people, and by that point I think they liked me. So again, I don't know, if you can reach out to lecturers, if you can write them emails when you're applying and say, oh, well, I've got a question about this, or can we have a meeting about this, or, you know, like their LinkedIn posts, connect with them on LinkedIn, like repost on things that they like. I think it's very difficult to get a PhD because there are so many things. You could be the most intelligent, cleverest, beautiful person ever with 75 years of experience, but someone else might have that same experience and be besties with them. Or someone else might have that same experience but also have lived experience of the project, and therefore they're probably going to be seen as more of an asset to that project. Don't be disheartened when you're rejected. Like, boy, it sucks. Boy, I cried so many times. But at the end of the day, people were better than me. Like, yeah, I'm salty about it. Yes, I'm upset. Yeah, nobody gave me any feedback and it was very annoying. But at the end of the day, a PhD is a very big thing. And I think, especially when you're kind of in undergrad, they're very much like, I feel like when I was in undergrad or in masters, it's kind of like, oh, you'll do a PhD next then. Like, you know, you'll be looking at PhDs next. And I think you're just kind of, it kind of just looks like a next step thing rather than being something that you're like, well, no, this is actually like a big commitment. This is like a, you know, you're going to do 4 years of another degree. You have to be quite interested in that and quite good and kind of well-rounded to get into that. So as much as it's disheartening to get rejections, rejection is redirection. I used to hate when people would say that to me because I'd go, okay, well, I didn't want to be redirected, but I'm very happy with the PhD I'm going to be doing. Like, at the time, if someone had told me after I'd been rejected from something like, oh, eventually you'll get one, I'd have gone, oh my god, though, but I wanted this one. Like, I think my tips for kind of applying and doing all of this is, first of all, you just find a PhD, apply for literally anything. Like, do not be selective about your applications. It's fine if, you know, if you, let's go with my examples of I was looking for something with autism. As soon as they mentioned autism, I was hitting apply. Yes, there were some that I was maybe not as interested in. It's free to apply. I was unemployed and had nothing else to do. Give me an interview and give me experience. Like, have that interview experience, have experience of writing CVs, writing supporting statements, and then at the end of it go, can I please have some feedback? No, they won't always give you feedback because there's still a PhD that I applied for in October, had an interview in person in January, got rejected in January. and they said, we'll give you feedback in 11 weeks. I don't have any feedback, but like, ask for feedback, ask for advice of what to do better. Like, sometimes they can't give you advice, sometimes it will just be someone else had more experience, and you can take that as a I can't do anything about that, or you can take it as a, well, I'm going to get some kind of experience. Again, you don't have to then decide I'm going to go and work as this. It can be that I'm going to go volunteer as this, or after be that you go, I'm going to go get a full-time job now doing this. It can just be that, oh, well, actually I did do this, but I've been forgetting to mention it, or I have this transferable skill that I now need to talk about. So I think, yeah, applying is disheartening, getting all these rejections is disheartening, but be okay to be annoying and ask for feedback, ask for, you know, is there anything I could have done better? Do you think my supporting statement was good enough? Was it the interview? Like, the best way to get better at applications is just continuing to do them. I've been applying for 3 years. I've done countless interviews where I felt like this was really good, and then you get rejected. Eventually one of the ones that was really good will get you somewhere. You know, it's very disheartening, especially when there's nothing that it feels like you can do. But the best thing to do is just keep going. Like, keep applying, even if it's not something that you're absolutely in love with and desperately want to do. Get the experience of applying, get the experience of having interviews. Feel comfortable being rejected. I say that as someone that wasn't comfortable being rejected. I cried all the time about it. But like, you're not going to get everything. You're not going to get it first time. You're not going to get it second time. You know, someone might be better than you, and that's okay. You can be salty about it like I am, but rejection is redirection.